Jessica Kender is the production designer behind Little Fires Everywhere, starring Reese Witherspoon and Kerry Washington. I'm Kevin Jacobsen of Gold Derby, here to ask Jessica, first of all, the Richardson house. Obviously a big part of this story, a real kind of centerpiece. So how did you go about finding the right look for that?
Well, we originally scouted Shaker Heights and spent about 2.5 days in Ohio. And it also happens that my dad's from there. So I would go once a year to visit my grandma right by Shaker Heights. And we spent time looking in the area where we thought she would live. And as soon as we had that in our heads, when we came back to LA, we knew exactly what we wanted. We knew the area LA had it. We went and it basically told us who it was supposed to be. There was only one house and we just pursued it, got it. And then from there went into building the interior, which doesn't match the actual location house that we did pick. But my whole goal in that house was to make it something where you had depth everywhere you looked, because the story is so much about both the presentation that Elena puts on, but also that there are all these sort of deep, almost secrets that are being covered up. And so it has both this feeling of wealth, which Seeing Into Every Room does, but also this slightly voyeuristic feel, because no matter where you are in the space, you can see into every other room.
Right, yeah. And also the apartment that Mia and Pearl are renting is certainly smaller scale, but still very, very full and detailed. And I think it's very reflective of an artist's workspace in a way. So how did you approach designing the Warren household?
The Warren was interesting because me and my decorator, Lisa Clark, we ended up almost basing it a little bit on how our own first apartments were. You know, when you're back, you're an art student, you don't have a ton of money, but you're still trying to make the space something that is interesting and cool. And so we approached it that way from the decoration standpoint. And then something that was really important to the producers was the way that we set up the studio. We needed very much Pearl to feel a divide between her mom and herself. And so we put those French doors because it's almost like you should be able to see in, but she doesn't let her. And so that was sort of a big part of the initial design of the space. I also thought it was important with the Warren house, because they move into it over the course of the series, that it be an interesting space to look at with no furniture in it. So if you look, there's like super heavy plaster on the walls. I did try and there's a lot of sort of mimicking that goes on between the two households. They're very different, but because each household needs to make the other woman's daughter fall in love when they walk in, we sort of play off that a little. So there's a lot of back and forth in sight lines in the Warren household as well.
Right. And so how did you actually come to be involved with Little Fires Everywhere? Had you read the book before, or?
I had a midlife crisis where for the first time ever, I decided that I really needed to pick my projects. I had been lucky enough to work on a show called Future Man, which was so thrilling that I finally decided I'm going to pick things. I have 2 kids, and I had always made an agreement that I wouldn't go out of town. I sat down with my husband and said, look, I want another project that is satisfying. And he said, do it. And so I actually turned down work for almost 4 months before Little Fires came across my desk. And a producer that I had worked with said, I think this is the show you're waiting for. She knew that I was doing this, and she said, I think it's this. And I read the script and I was in love. I usually prep for interviews for probably around 12 hours a day. And I prepped for an entire week for this show. I was like, I have to get this show. Like the characters. So they sent me the book and they sent me the first script, and the book was great. And then the script went into the characters. I was like, this is it. This is mine. I went into that interview and I was like, I have to tell you, like, here is every room in every of the 2 houses. This is exactly how I see it. I really hope you think the same way I do, because this is meant for me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I mean, what kind of challenges did you actually run into, considering this is technically a period piece set in the 90s, which doesn't feel like too long ago for some of us, but certainly a different kind of world in some ways from just what we're experiencing, now just a few decades later.
It's funny. So I graduated college in 97. So it is a very, like, I am very much in tune with that time. But when you think about the design of the 90s, it is not a beloved decade at all. Like if I say to you the 70s, you can immediately think of furniture and looks that come from it, or, the 50s or the 60s. But the 90s, nobody thinks of as design because nobody likes it, really. But what was interesting when I went back and started looking it up, I was like, no, it had a really strong point of view. It's just not one that we like. So I would say 2 challenges that came is I really felt like the Richardson house, we needed to make it a period piece, but it needed to be a house that still looked good, still had that feeling when you walk into it of like, this person has taste, this person has money. And so finding that fine line of hitting the 90s, which is not attractive to our eye, but also hitting the 90s in a way that still looked good. Like there were a lot of forest greens, there were a lot of pattern on pattern on pattern. So if you look, like the curtains are flipped over to make the pillows, the table runner matches the seat cushions. We did a lot of that, but we tried to be a little bit more subtle so that when you watched it, you weren't like, and then, right? I mean, because some of it, yeah.
It's a lot, yeah.
Yeah. And then the other tricky thing was that because people don't love the 90s, there isn't a plethora of furniture out there to pull from because nobody saved it. Like nobody saved that, not true. Some people did, but like the giant sleigh beds or the 4 poster beds, like they're not in style and they're not retro enough that people are like, I want that. So it was a lot of like, we got a lot of stuff off of eBay. We got a lot of stuff off of Craigslist that people were just trying to get rid of instead of like vintage pieces that people were trying to like keep up and sell.
Yeah, I imagine that was a bit of a challenge there.
Sorry.
No, it's okay.
Even
Go
with
ahead.
Cars, like people don't like 90s cars, but they have a distinct look. So just finding 90s cars that weren't falling apart, because nobody's like, I'm going to restore my, 90s SUV. Yeah. Although we were lucky, we got that one. They gave it to us because they were like, oh, here you go. We'll give you this pretty nice restored SUV.
Right. Well, and I know that this filmed in Southern California, even though it takes place in Shaker Heights, which I imagined was a bit of a challenge as well.
It's funny. I think what was harder than actually doing Shaker Heights, LA for Shaker Heights, was doing the seasons, because the show passes through so many seasons. I think it's, LA is set up to do a lot of filming. And so if you've done it for a while, especially because I haven't left LA, I know the little pockets that look East Coast and you can find those. But then once you get into fall and once you get into winter, that is hard to do in LA. Then you have to be really good friends with your director and cinematographer, because I can only afford to snow this section and that's it, or I can only afford to bring in this many trees that look like fall and, only 50 bags of leaves we can spread all over. That I found a little bit harder because LA is always green. LA is always beautiful. Like you go around for the different seasons and you have to trim all the flowers off of all the bushes, so you have to find someone who's willing to let you cut their prize rose bushes apart. That I found trickier.
Yeah, good point. Yeah, I didn't even think about that. But so we also see Mia creating these beautiful, great art pieces throughout the series. And I was wondering just what the process was behind those designs.
So we actually hired a local LA artist whose name is Connie Trevino Martin. And she and I worked together with the writers, producers to create them. Because the art is so specific, everyone knew right from the beginning that there should be a strong viewpoint leading it. And art outside of what I do is so subjective that without someone who's sort of leading the vision, it would have been difficult. So she came in and we would work together to create each piece. You know, when she interviewed, she happened to show this photo that she had done about 20 years ago where she had used cheesecloth over the lens. That was written into one of the scripts. And the second she showed that piece and described her process, everyone was like, this is it. She's it. And so we would just go back and forth because she had never worked with a production where you have to work on a specific timeline or within the constraints of the story. So take, for example, the Burning Elena face. That was originally written very, very different. You know, it's going to be like this 3D wire mesh, you know, like thing. And she came back and she said, I wouldn't make this way. This isn't the way I would do it. And I said, well, we have certain story beats we have to hit, you know, because it was very important to see Izzy working on the project with me and Izzy working alone. And so we asked Liz, the showrunner, to list out how many beats do you want and what do those beats need to accomplish. And then Connie went off on her own and came back with, this is what I would do. And here is what I would do those beats as. And that's kind of how the process went the whole way through. It was very exciting.
Mm-hmm. Well, can you just tell us about, you know, designing that beautiful replica model of the town that we see in the final episode with the flower that Mia was working on?
Well, what was actually a funny realization for us is that flour isn't white when you actually make it into a paste, because our original idea was that we were going to get sort of shells that we would go on top of with this, because we don't need to show that she's making the molds and popping them out, which is the way that conceptually she was supposed to do it, have a bunch of little molds of all the little houses, pop them out, and then do the individual pieces. But when we started doing it, we put it on, the flour looked kind of yellowy and gross. So what we actually did was tons of white spray paint and then a bunch of caulk and baking soda. And originally we took this super old map of the town and blew it up. And that's how we came out with the grid. And then we went back and forth with Connie on, you know, like what type of houses. We ended up, the little houses are actually little Monopoly houses that are covered. And then Connie went to town on it, came back, and then we sort of spent 2 weeks kind of fine tuning it. And, you know, like, she was the one who thought we should add in all the trees. And then, you know, she worked on all the custom pieces. And then we would come through and like add more gack to them so they looked a little more organic, you know, and we tried about 6 different bird cages until we came across that one, you know, and went back and forth. And one of the things that I loved is when you look really closely at where the bird cage was, there's the big tree that was outside of the Richardson, there's the driveway, there's the mailbox, you know, it's all, you would have to freeze the frame and really stare at it, but it is all the things that exist on our exterior location are there right by the bird cage.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I remember seeing it just then wanting to freeze frame it myself to look at all the little details. Yeah, but I've talked to some other people from Little Fires Everywhere over the past few weeks, and I've gathered that this was a very collaborative and very like supportive set, kind of on the whole. Can you just talk about what the experience was like overall, just from your perspective, compared to other shows that you've worked on?
Well, I have to say, one of the things that is very different is it is very female driven. Mm-hmm. I would say that on typical shows, women are still considerably the minority. You know, I'll sit in meetings of 30 people and it'll be me and maybe 2 other women. Here, all the producers are women. You know, our leads are women. We had female directors. And that alone was different. And we were lucky within this group that it was a very supportive group. Everybody had a voice, you know, like there was Simpson Street and Hello Sunshine, and they approved everything, but they were also very respectful. You know, if it was something that involved Mia's character more, then Simpson Street would put their input, and Hello Sunshine would be there and involved in the meetings, but they would step back. If it was something with Elena, the opposite would happen. And people were very open to ideas. Like, I think one of the things that was exciting for me and represents just the way that the show is, when I came in for my interview, I had a piece of research in my interview that the producers really responded to. When the first script rewrite came out, they had written that into the script. And I think that speaks to sort of how they were. If you had a good idea, you were able to put it on the table and explain why you wanted it. And they were very willing to work with that. It was really it was like no other show I've been on, really.
Yeah, that sounds really, really awesome, actually. Yeah, and well, you were nominated by your peers at the Art Directors Guild Award a few years back for, you mentioned it earlier, Future Man. So, I mean, what was it like just getting that kind of recognition from your fellow art directors and production designers?
Because I did Future Man, and that ended me on Little Fires, even though they're very different shows. I felt as strongly about Future Man as I did about Little Fires, in that it gave me this tremendous feeling of satisfaction. And because Future Man is this niche or specific market with, you know, this demographic that it tries to attack, you think, I'm creating this product I'm so proud of, and I loved it. You know, I get a lot of joy from watching Future Man. I get a lot of joy from watching Little Fires. But when I was recognized for this, it made me realize that it was reaching other people, you know, and that people were seeing this work and they thought that even though it wasn't a show for everybody, the work was good enough that the work was recognized by all the peers. And it was so exciting. I can remember exactly where I was when I got the phone call that we were nominated. I was in the car driving to Universal Studios with my kids, and my art director called me and he was like, "We got nominated." And I was like, what? And then that rest of that day, I couldn't focus. You know, like, I remember being online for rides, like texting my parents, you know, texting my best friend. It was exciting.
That's awesome. Yeah. Well, I want to thank you, Jessica, for talking to us today. We really appreciate it.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. And for those of you watching, hit like and subscribe for more Emmy season interviews just like this, and head to goldderby.com to make your predictions and a whole lot more. Thanks again.
Thanks so much.